Hello and welcome to The Swinging Christies, the podcast about Agatha Christie in the swinging 60s. My name's Mark Aldridge. I'm an Agatha Christie historian, writer. And my latest book, Agatha Christie's Marple Expert on Wickedness, is out now.
Yes, and I'm Grey Robert Brown. I'm a writer, an Agatha fan. I'm an international man of mystery jet setter because today, Mark, we are... What are we doing?
Well, we are literally looking at planes at the moment, but not in a plane spottery way, but because we're waiting for our gate to be called because we're on a trip.
We're heading to New York City, baby.
We are heading to New York City. This came out of the fact that for years I've known that there are some archives in America that I wanted to consult, but they were all quite small or they hadn't really been looked at, and so it's a bit of a gamble to go all that way and find that these are empty folders. And so I find...
But we still might.
Yeah, we still might, yeah. Oh, there's every chance. So
brace yourself, listeners, for an episode that may end in supreme disappointment.
Yeah, because I thought that what we would do was... I would say, right, there's a way to go to 3 of these different archives. So you're sort of spreading the possibilities that you might find something. But also we wanted to do an American episode.
We did.
So I was like, well, let's find a way that we can do all of this together. So we only have to fly once out to America and back. So this is what we're doing.
Special USA little mini-series, really, because we've got... So part 1 is this episode.
Yes.
We're going to be recording from New York.
Yes.
And... visiting some archives there. Then part 2, we're off to Washington DC.
Yes, we
are.
And
we're even doing an extra special episode about an American author after that, whilst we're on our trip as well. But more details to follow. So yeah, super exciting.
I know, and I'm actually really chilled about it because we're all just going to places where I've been before, and so it's just like I'm not worried about. Sometimes you go on holiday and you're like, how do I get to places? And now I'm just like, oh, I can actually go and I can enjoy the archive, enjoy the recording, enjoy the bits that we're doing without the practicalities being too much of a concern.
Yes, and I've newly made it my personality to just never not be in airports. So
yes, because you've just come back from Japan. So you're literally going east to us and then going to west.
I don't know what time it is, listener. I don't know what day it is. I look haggard, but I'm very excited nonetheless.
You confess to a lot of jet lag from...
Yes.
I wonder if this will be like Superman will turn back time because we'll go so
quickly. I made that reference the other day to someone, even though I've never seen that film.
Oh. But just before we do head off to our gates, about to be announced, I do want to check that you've got your important documents. So you've got your passport.
Yep.
Have you got your boarding pass?
I have.
Do you have your cloak? Because you got it, and that's the only way to get back. They won't even look at you twice.
Unfortunately,
if you put on your passenger to Frankfurt cloak, they will just wave you through. You could be travelling on your sister's passport, and they're not going to know.
This is some cruel Mickey taking from you. I refuse to Frankfologise for my devotion to that title. No, although I do think that cloak was listed under prohibited items when we went through security just now.
That's it. That's why, because they know the scam now.
Yeah, this is it. We've got the spirit of Agatha guiding us all the way to America. Shall we go?
Let's go.
So here we are. We made it.
We have made it. Very
New York
smooth
City.
Journey, and here we are in New York City, in Manhattan, specifically in Central Park.
We are. We're next to Bow Bridge, and we maybe just witnessed a proposal.
Yes, I think so.
There was a lot of applause. We don't think it was for us.
And I think someone shouted. She said yes.
Oh really?
I do think that's what I heard.
Oh okay.
But I've got a suspicion if we sit here long enough, there will be another one. I feel like there's just like a little queue somewhere that people just wait a respectful half hour.
And
then they'll do their proposal.
Well, it's a beautiful spot. I mean, I've never been to. I should say I've never been to New York before. You have.
Yes.
And it's beautiful.
It's really beautiful.
And this is a particularly nice spot and a particularly nice day. It's sort of 23 and sunny and.
Yes.
So why are we in America? Why are we specifically in New York, Mark?
Well, so partly it's because of the archive stuff I said before we took off. But America is important to Agatha Christie. Big part of her audience was over here. And as Jacqueline Lurker, who comes to the Agatha Christie Festival every year and is American, always reminds us quite rightly, Agatha was half American.
Yeah.
And you forget that because she just seems so quintessentially British.
Yeah.
So I like to feel we're paying tribute to half of her sort of backgrounds.
Yeah. And it's definitely not just an excuse for a jolly, is what you're telling me.
It's definitely not. We've got a really full itinerary. Can I remind you? We genuinely have an itinerary where we have got every day planned out.
True.
It's all we're doing.
It's true. And unusually for us, we aren't currently sat here with beers. So.
No.
So definitely there are American references peppered throughout her from the very beginning. We will obviously not go through and list them all because that would be madness. And obviously we have our unique kind of swinging perspective where we're looking specifically, if you're fairly new to us, between the years sort of 1959 and 1971-ish. But it's true to say that America kind of stands tall in the Christie canon from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, America publishes The Mysterious Ferret Styles, her debut, before the UK does, a year before.
Absolutely.
1920.
Yeah. Yes.
And book 2, so The Secret Adversary, right from the off you get that sequence with the Lusitania, and Jane Finn has left New York, where we are right now, on board the Lusitania. So right at the beginning of Christie's canon. And actually, it's funny, I was at rereading The Secret Adversary recently, and you forget that she says that Tuppence has a sort of transatlantic accent.
It's funny, isn't it? Something about her speaking in a modern way, isn't there? There's the way that like that's what a modern person would.
Yeah, and certainly the way that Alex Jennings performs his reading of that book gives Tuppence that twang, to the point where I was like, "Is that wrong? That feels like a mistake." But I went back to the text, and he's absolutely right.
Yes,
but that's partly why we're here, I guess, is to kind of restate Christie's relationship with American culture.
Yeah, because when we're thinking about America for Agatha Christie in the 1960s, there's a big thing right at the beginning of the decade that Harold Ober, her American agent, who had been her agent for a very long time, dies in 1959, and Dorothy Olding then takes over, who had done a fair bit for Agatha Christie at this point, because it's Harold Ober and Associates, so she was one of the associates. So Harold Ober had like health problems earlier in the 50s, so Dorothy Olding stood in then. But there's a really lovely tribute to him that I actually put on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I didn't delete it. And I think might make it into another project I'm doing, where there was a whole tribute to Harold Ober in a magazine in 1960 or 61 that was all about sort of people that had died in the last year or two.
Right.
Which just shows how important he was. And he sounded like a really lovely man.
Yeah.
So that's a big, although they weren't close, but they did know each other a little. In terms of the world of Agatha Christie, that's a big old thing to lose an agent of decades to suddenly have someone else deal with that day-to-day stuff.
Well, yeah, and there's a hell of a lot of correspondence between the two of them. There's a hell of a lot of correspondence between Christie and Dorothy Olding as well.
Yes.
So, because she then represents Christie in America until Christie's death, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right, yeah. So I think it's worth thinking about when we get to the 60s then, if America's been ever present, but is there a difference when, by the time we get to the 60s, Agatha Christie knows that's a huge market for her. I mean, she's known it for a while, but particularly in the 60s, it's like cemented that American money is important to her income and Agatha Christie Limited's income. So what sort of references do you think we can find in this era then?
Yeah, so we had a bit of a project going through, didn't we? I think one of the main ways in which America and Americans are referred to in these titles or one of the main things they represent, I suppose, is the other or the exotic. So the idea that there's something exciting about Americana. So it comes up a couple of times, the idea that pretending to be American could be a disguise within her mystery plots. So the mysterious woman who brings Jennifer her new racket in Cat Among the Pigeons.
Cat Among the Pigeons is a Poirot novel about the murder of a games mistress at a girls' school from 1959.
In the hopes of essentially exchanging that new racket for the one that's full of jewels and sort of central to the mystery plot there. We're told, it speaks with a slight American accent. It's not apparent whether she is American or if that's her putting it on, but the idea that someone who's a bit mysterious would be presented to us through a sort of lens of Americanism is interesting. And later Jennifer says, you see, I didn't really look at her much. She was an American and a stranger, so you get that idea then. And then she told me about the racket. And similarly in the clock.
Yes, so I'd forgotten about this until I was doing the search. So when Miss Martindale buys the clocks of the title, which are, around the crime scene, she buys them from Portobello Market, and they find that out pretty quickly that someone had bought them there, and the person who sold it could only really describe the person as having an American accent. And two things about that. Firstly, they say quite rightly, there's a lot of Americans here, so sort of blending into the background. Tourists, yeah.
Portobello Market.
Absolutely, yeah. But also you get the sense that is immediately suspicious to the investigators, because you're like, well, that's probably someone pretending to be an American. Like, they don't necessarily think, oh, that means we're looking for an American. They mean, oh, this is somebody who's trying to hide their identity. And right at the end, there's like a passing mention that the person who sold the books looks at a photo of Miss Martindale and goes, oh, yes. So that's nicely, easily solved at the end.
Yeah. Well, and following on from that, so tourism, that's the other thing that American references in these books commonly linked to is tourists and tourism. And specifically, of course, at Bertram's Hotel.
At Bertram's Hotel is a Miss Marple novel set in a London hotel, which is not quite what it seems, from 1965.
So we're told that the setup of that hotel is specifically alluring to American tourists because it represents a sort of England that never was, that appeals to that culture's, and this is a sweeping statement, of course, but that culture's common kind of Anglophile nature, I guess. So
interesting, like almost it seeming exotic in a way that us feels quite mundane.
Yes.
The idea of sort of like artening tears and stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of presenting certainly an England that doesn't exist anymore, but also one, funnily enough, kind of what we say about Christie time, kind of an England that never really existed, but it's the cultural perception.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're told at Bertram's Hotel that you have people from Boston and Washington, and that they're very quiet, nice people. We'll go on to this in part 2 when we travel to Washington DC, but it's not readily apparent which Washington Christie means when she refers to Washington in several of her 60s books. We are aware of that there is a difference between Washington and Washington DC. But
I have had that panic, by the way. First time I went to Washington DC, I had a momentary panic going, have I booked a flight?
Oh, don't tell me this now.
No.
The train's in 4 days.
Oh my God, I think it's a slightly longer journey to Washington State than it is to Washington DC. Well, that's like basically Canada on the west coast.
Yeah. Well, it will never be as bad as what we were talking about earlier, a long thing where Birmingham City Council in England produced a pamphlet with Birmingham, Alabama pictures all over it, which they'll never live down. So yes, in Bertram's, so we're told there was a double bar with 2 bar attendants, an American barman to make the Americans feel at home, and to provide them with bourbon, rye is going to crop up again in a minute, and every kind of cocktail, and an English one to deal with the sherries and the Pims. So it's quite interesting how segregated the kind of American aspects of the culture in Bertram's and the English aspects are, but it does, as we know by the end of the book, there's something very directed and conscious about the hotel's appeal to that kind of market. So the manager Humphreys says at one point, it's a question of atmosphere. Strangers coming to this country, brackets, Americans in particular, because they are the ones who have the money, close brackets, which is another cultural stereotype.
Thing I'll come back to.
Which crops up a lot in Christie, doesn't it? Have their own rather queer ideas of what England is like. I'm not talking, you understand, of the rich business tycoons who are always crossing the Atlantic. They usually go to the Savoy or the Dorchester. They want all the things that make them feel at home. But there are a lot of people who come abroad at rare intervals and who expect this country to be, well, I won't go back as far as Dickens, but they've read Cranford and Henry James, and they just don't want to find this country just the same as their own. So they go back home afterwards and say, there's a wonderful place in London, Bertram's Hotel it's called. It's just like stepping back 100 years. It just is old England. Thank you.
I say there's quite a bit of irony that we're saying that in Central Park, like the most sort of touristy.
Oh, absolutely.
We were doing the absolute,
It's not and some of the looks we're getting as people walk past is hammering that home. Yeah, it hasn't escaped my notice that it's the equivalent of Kemper doing an episode from Leicester Square or outside Big Ben.
Yeah. But it's nice. I love there's references in Bertram as well to food. Like food is real shown as a difference. There's stuff about the afternoon teas we've already said, and also apparently Lady Selina says that Bertram's is the only place in London you can still get muffins, real muffins. Do you know, when I went to America last year, they had something called muffins on the breakfast menu. Not real muffins at all, kind of a tea cake with raisins in them. I mean, why call them muffins? So I don't even know what she thinks muffins are and what I think muffins are. I don't think a muffin, I mean, a tea cake sounds like what she's describing as American muffin. I wouldn't call that American muffin.
Hilariously, didn't we have this exact conversation at breakfast this morning?
Because we've bought those sort of muffins that you get in sort of plastic that I think will outlive us all.
So where
muffin
we're saying,
for me is like, it's a bread, like flat roll that you toast. It's like a tea cake but without the raisins.
Yeah,
That's
but
what
muffin here is more like cupcake.
Oh yeah, muffin
isn't it?
is right. Yeah. But I'm wondering what Lady Selina thinks a muffin is. Like, you can get those muffins anywhere.
But isn't that interesting that to her, Bertram's is so English that it even has muffins that even the regular English outside of Bertram's Hotel have given up on. Yeah. But that is hilarious, because that is exactly, we had that exact conversation at breakfast.
We did.
The host, we spoke to Kemba from All About Agatha at the festival last year in Devon about the differences between the sort of cooked breakfast, like the sort of greasy fry up in England, and how you wouldn't really get that here. Although I did have tater tots here.
Yes.
Which is pretty
Went back
pretty
for
full
two.
English to me.
Went back again,
I did. I went back for a second helping of tater tots. But yes, speaking of the American style breakfast, it's clearly something that Agatha is preoccupied by, because she refers to it also in Endless Night. So Michael talks of Ellie having that American habit of drinking coffee and a glass of orange juice and having nothing much else for breakfast. And we're also told that Americans need at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit more in terms of room temperature.
Which is again another conversation we've just had, because you great, so he doesn't understand Fahrenheit, so
it's not that I don't understand Fahrenheit, Mark. What happened was, listener, you will not understand how jet lagged I am. I've been in 17 time zones in the last 3 weeks, and you were trying to talk to me about Fahrenheit last night, and I just wanted to go to sleep.
you just said, can you turn up the temperature? And I said, it's set at 69. You said, I don't know what that means. I don't know what Fahrenheit is.
As usual, oh my God, I don't know.
It's not even true.
I don't know.
There's also this thing that I noticed, there's just this general thing about Americans do things differently. And I think we've spoken a bit about Marina and Mirror Cracked enough to get a sense of that, but...
The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side is a Miss Marple novel about a poisoning at a film star's house. It's from 1962.
Marina, who I said before, I think, on the pod, I've never been quite sure whether she's supposed to be American or British, but most places do call her American. But I think
most adaptations cast her American, is that fair to say?
Well, Elizabeth Taylor. And for me, she's like Elizabeth Taylor, where someone who might have been born in Britain, gone to Hollywood as a young age,
and made it big there.
Because otherwise, it's like, how does she have all these links back to when she comes back to England? It just feels weird to me a bit. But
Jason Rudd
is American, definitely.
Is
and Marina effectively is, because she's Hollywoodized. Whatever happens,
true.
She's
the
part of that.
function of the plot. What she represents is Hollywood. Yeah. Intrinsically American.
But that American thing of they do things differently. They'll dispense Carmo much more than they might do in the UK. And some of the stuff about the adoption, even, I think feels like that whole story. Like it wouldn't be handled that way in Britain, let's put it that way. It's a way that she was able to adopt quite freely and then sort of give them away effectively. So I think there's quite a lot in that is just about America is not the same as Britain.
Yeah, and that can be a point of comedy, and historically that's always been a point of comedy, that kind of, we say pants, you say trousers, the sort of difference between cultures. And Christie does sort of engage in that kind of thing. But also, in terms of the contrast, which Mirror Cracked is built on, right? The contrast between the old and new worlds, we've said it many times, and is integral to that story.
Well, and if we're going to push it, then the victim is killed with an American daiquiri. Not just a daiquiri, it's specifically called an American daiquiri.
Yeah.
So
just to be clear, we're not blaming America for Heather Babcock's death. I just want to, because people are in fact in earshot. Locals are in earshot.
Yeah.
I just want to make that absolutely clear.
Although there's this funny bit, talking of America, about where there is a passing mention of American gangsters, I think, that because there are Americans in the vicinity, Miss Knight, who Miss Marple famously hates and is her helper and won't leave her alone, says that with all these American gangsters and things like that, well, I suppose it's nothing to be surprised about. Which,
Yes.
so someone, Miss Knight in particular, I guess, is either going to the movies or reading a lot of American crime fiction.
I'm fairly sure we get similar references in By the Pricking of My Thumbs about American gangsters as well, American crime. But yeah, that leads us neatly on to one of the main types of references we get to American culture specifically in the swinging books, is to American detective fiction. So in The Pale Horse...
The Pale Horse is a standalone novel that explores mysterious goings-on and unexplained deaths at a countryside inn from 1961.
Yeah, so in The Pale Horse, Mark Easterbrook, when he meets Ariadne, says, oh, you don't smoke? And Miss Oliver says, no, I don't drink either. I wish I did. Like those American detectives that always have pints of rye conveniently in their collar drawers. I did look up what collar drawer is.
Yeah, thank you, because I had no idea.
So officially it starts as being literally a drawer within your wardrobe where you would put your shirt collars, which when they were detachable. But it seems to become a sort of name for when you have a little set of drawers within something else. So like if you opened your study desk, then you might have a little set of drawers in it, or underneath where it is.
I
So it's like
see.
drawers within something else. So anyway, so it seems to solve all their problems.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? That I think what Christie's gently ribbing is the fact that in hardboiled detective fiction, whereas in a Christie, you often have that kind of deductive moment when, I don't know, Hastings says something and it jogs Poirot's memory, or Marple hears something and then it inspires her to set a trap. And in pulp American detective fiction, the point often is that they take a swig and that inspires them to sort of emboldens them to launch into Act 3 or the climax, or to reprimand the murderer or whatever it may be. And of course those pulpy American detective fiction references, and specifically the Rye image, the main point at which we get that is in the clocks. We've talked about this before, but Poirot's knowledge of detective fiction, and in part American detective fiction, is crucial to the solving of that mystery. Is actually the point at which a crucial clue is buried, isn't it, about Gary Gregson. And there's a point, so we get the Rye image again. Actually, we get it because Colin Lamb says, he's sort of joking, and he says, that my life has been full of beautiful spies of every nationality, all of them with vital statistics that would make an American private eye forget all about the shot of rye in his collar drawer. I'm immune to all female allurements, he says.
It's gone down from a pint to a shot now. So
interesting.
A pint of rye is quite a lot. I think someone must have said, I know you don't drink, Agatha, let's try and get this
Yes,
a little bit more believable.
But specifically in Poirot's big speech to Colin about this magnum opus that he's writing on crime fiction. So he says, now here is Gary Gregson, a prodigious writer of thrillers. He is not quite, as you would say, my cup of tea. He is in fact not a cup of tea at all. He is more like one of those American cocktails of the more obscure kind, whose ingredients are highly suspect. And of course Gary Gregson ends up crucial to the solving of it all.
And then when Poirot goes on elsewhere in his lecture about crime fiction, Colin Lamb asks about the tough school, and Poirot says violence for violence's sake, which is exactly how Agatha Christie described it in an interview, actually. So no surprise there. Since when has that been interesting? But he does give American crime fiction, on the whole, a pretty high place, and actually thinks it's more imaginative and ingenious than a lot of English writing.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we have
that's a
quoted this
surprise.
passage before, and it always strikes me how it starts off like he's going to deride it all, but actually, like with Christie, it is a bit of a ribbing about the rye and stuff, and he objects to the violence, but then he does say, actually, in terms of quality, overall, I've enjoyed studying it, is essentially what he says.
And then he talks about Louisa O'Malley, who's not a real writer, as in she's fictitious, but both John Curran and Curtis Evans, when I searched for this, I found Curtis Evans' blog called The Passing Tramp, and he thinks, and apparently John Curran agrees, that it's Elizabeth Daly, basically, who I got to confess I haven't read any of, but For Poirot, she is a model of fine scholarly writing, and he talks about the atmosphere of New York, that she writes brownstone mansions, exclusive apartments, and soulful snobberies, and underneath deep unsuspected seams of crime run their uncharted course. And that's that's just basically what you could say of British society as well. So it's interesting that he's saying here's another sort of embedded society where there are currents happening under the surface, that he obviously thinks, and I guess Christie thinks, works particularly well.
Although, I mean, it's funny. I mean, we're literally looking at some brownstone mansions as we speak. I mean, it's funny. That is a New York architecture, and I guess it's the same as saying the aesthetics of London crime writing is very, I don't know, lampposts and manicured parks and Edwardian townhouses. Yeah, and then in the next Poirot novel, which is Third Girl.
Third Girl is a Poirot novel set in swinging London about a young woman who thinks she may have committed a murder from 1966.
We're told that he has finished his magnum opus, and it says he had dared to speak scathingly of Edgar Allan Poe. He had complained of the lack of method or order in the romantic outpourings of Wilkie Collins, had lauded to the skies two American authors who were practically unknown. So again, we get this idea that he's not actually per se against American crime fiction. And then I mean, as we're here, it would be rude not to give a specific shout out to New York. New York is called out specifically in several of the swinging titles. Probably one of the most interesting, I think, is that the thallium poisoning case, which is so important to the Pale Horse, did happen in New York, we're told, by Mark Easterbrook.
Yes, that's where he discovered it. Well, we've mentioned in an earlier podcast about we know that Agatha Christie and Max went to America in the 1960s. So Max was invited on this lecture tour, and Agatha Christie accompanied him. So I think that's a really interesting idea as to what Agatha Christie might have wanted to discover about this country in the 1960s. And I wonder how much it changed from when she'd gone there early on. And back in 1922, she was in New York briefly. So the world changes a lot in those 44 years or so.
It's good to remember as well that even in her comparatively later years, she still had this wanderlust that she had in her earlier years. She still, you read the itinerary out of the US trip in an earlier episode, and it is incredible all the different places they went, not just New York and DC, but all over, for a far more ambitious itinerary than we have. And that's a woman in her 70s. So, speaking of previous episodes, we did actually find a really interesting reference in one of the notebooks when we were recording our episode in the archives, if you recall. And I remember at the time you flagging it and us talking about whether we should do it now or save it for America. And we saved it, especially for this moment. So, in this notebook, she tells us that they visited a carbon-14 laboratory with a Professor Davies when in Austin, Texas in 1966. She writes, so complicated a process that one really can't understand how anyone even thought of it. So carbon-14, this is properly fascinating for me because, I'm such a Cold War geek. Carbon-14 is a very slightly radioactive isotope, and it is involved in nuclear weapons testing. Actually, when you test a nuclear weapon, one of the things that is released into the atmosphere is carbon-14. And, I mean, again, we say it all the time, but isn't this Christie with her finger on the pulse? She's there in the laboratory talking about this really quite complicated physics. Does insight like this help inspire books like Passenger to Frankfurt?
Passenger to Frankfurt is a standalone espionage thriller about Sir Stafford Nye's hunt for answers from 1970.
I mean, Passenger to Frankfurt has numerous references to nuclear weapons. A lot of page time is given over to talk of it, and it's actually, I went back and looked at it again, and it is actually, accurate, the understanding. And specifically, she does speak about the impact of the soil and the air, specifically in France, but it's because the French ambassador is speaking at the time, when nuclear weapons are used, as in, if you're going to meddle with this kind of technology, think about the impact it's having on the environment around you. And I think part of the reason in that book why Project Benbow is how they kind of arrive at Project Benbow as a potential kind of solution is whether you view it as a kind of ultimate dystopia or an ultimate utopia, it is nevertheless a turning away from some sort of nuclear or radioactive weapon. And actually there's a quote: "We cannot use nuclear weapons, we cannot use explosives or gas or chemistry, but your project," I think speaking to Professor Shoreham, "but your project, Project Benbow, we could use."
Because when Agatha and Max come back from the trip, I think in Agatha Christie's writings you can really detect that suddenly it's at the top of her brain again. America has sort of cropped up again. Halloween party, I guess, perhaps most obviously.
Yeah, and we talked at length about the importance of Halloween to American culture and how her America trip no doubt put Halloween at the forefront of her mind for that subsequent novel. Yeah, and actually I can't remember where I read this. It's a very, very good point. I wish I could claim it as my own. It may even have been in All About Agatha. Maybe I did not read it at all. But somebody pointed out that in the 1950s, the party that we see Ariadne attending is quintessentially British, right, in Dead Man's Folly. And then by the 60s, the party that she goes to is tinged with Americana. That's the difference.
There is an explicit mention, isn't there, about the boys doing some harmless necking and then saying that's an American phrase. So obviously I guess Agatha had heard that on her travels. Like, all right, that's what the youth are doing these days. They're necking.
Mrs. Drake, isn't it? What the Americans call necking. You can imagine it being said. It's such brilliantly written dialogue. And also crucial to the spine of Endless Night.
Endless Night is a standalone psychological thriller in which young couple Michael and Ellie are menaced by unusual happenings from 1967.
Yes.
You know, so Michael, our protagonist, is British. He's a bit of an English kind of wide boy. And Ellie is a bit of a kind of American princess, I guess, a bit of a, American heiress kind of archetype. And the culture clash between the two of them, or rather the coming together of two cultures, because it's a romance plot for much of it, is central to that title. It's central actually to, we talk about this a lot, don't we? What do you think the point of Endless Night is when you first read it? For the first
you think it's like a twisted romance that someone's trying to upset.
Exactly. And I think actually that coming together of two cultures, and are they ultimately going to see eye to eye because they're from such different worlds, is one of the obfuscations to distract you from the fact that we're going to end up somewhere altogether quite different and darker in that book, because it leads you into thinking that the point is this kind of culture clash love story. Michael says to Ellie at one point, "What's your American phrase? I come from the wrong side of the tracks, don't I?" Well, I've had a lovely time in Central Park.
Nice.
It's so lovely.
Lots of lovely
I've been sat in the shade though. I'm going to need a bit of sun, I think.
I think so too.
And
I've been seeing these nice fruit cups.
Oh yeah, okay, let's grab some fruit. But yes, so tomorrow we're off to the Princeton Archive.
We are. Yes. Well, that's could be a journey of discovery for us, or it could be a load of old bills. We'll soon find out.
So we're back from the archive at Princeton.
Yes, we are.
Firestone Library, was it?
That's it, yes. Princeton University. Yes, we rode the dinky.
Oh my God. So the local shopping service between the main station and Princeton University is colloquially known as the dinky.
I mean, I'm not sure colloquially. Literally, the guard said, and it just changed for the dinky.
Well, I think he was being colloquial, no?
Well, yeah, but I mean...
But you are now
we're
obsessed.
Not locals, so...
You are now obsessed with the word dinky.
I love the word dinky.
You've said it 100 times.
Yeah.
And I'm still very jet lagged, and it's starting to grey. But no, a really productive and fascinating day at
Very
Princeton.
productive, because like I said, didn't really know what we might find.
Yeah.
And actually what it is what I'd hoped for, which is that, so in Britain, at the University of Exeter, there's the Hughes Massey Archive, which is their British agents. And this is the sort of mirror of that.
Yeah.
So this is the American side. So it's quite interesting, quite a lot of the stuff we saw today, I'd seen before, because I've seen it on the other side. I've seen, so they keep the originals here and then send it a copy or whatever, vice versa. So there's a copy in one location and the original in the other. So quite often you're seeing things from just one, from the other perspective now. So that was quite fun for me, but also it was, I think you enjoyed going through and having a look at some
absolutely. Some
stuff.
really interesting nuggets. And you without giving too much away, you are on the lookout for material for another top secret project.
That's true.
Which several of the tidbits that we uncover today is in service of.
Yes.
But we're just going to draw out some exciting little nuggets that are relevant to our swinging Christie's project.
Just little, yeah. I mean, few little things that we put down on our pad and pencil.
Yeah, yeah. So the records start from 1968.
Yes.
We don't know why.
No. It's just this thing, quite often you go to work and you go, why is this our home? And you go, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like it was just not deposited or it was lost. Or although, dear listener, if you know where the pre-1968 files are, if they're in your basement, give me a call. But I'm not aware of the pre-1968 ones surviving. 'Cause of course, they don't have to store them anywhere. They could just get rid of them if they wanted to.
Yeah. So that means we've got a good few years where we're looking at papers that are directly relevant to our timeline.
Yes.
And then a fair few years after that we consulted that still kind of felt relevant. So we're going to kick off in 1968. So the first thing, chronologically speaking, the first thing that I spotted that was super interesting to me. So as you know by now, one of the things we love to do is situate Christie and Christie's works in the world around her in terms of what was going on in this completely fascinating and turbulent decade. And there's a letter we uncovered between Nora Hughes Massey, who was Christie's British agency, and her American agents, where the American agent in question says, "Thank you for your sympathetic feelings about our national tragedy. Everyone feels almost numb." And the date is the 12th of June 1968, which is just less than a week, 6 days after the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, which we know from the contextual research that we've done was a moment of great kind of national mourning, and for many people kind of traumatizing in terms of bringing back that feeling from JFK's assassination in 1963, having just 2 months been through the same thing with Martin Luther King's assassination. And it's just fascinating, I think, to see these people that were very close to Christie, dealing with Christie's business interests, talking directly about something that's, a historical event. In the same letter as referring to the American edition of Endless Night. And similarly, in 1968, there's a lovely letter, a reply from Max Mallowan, Christie's husband, who had been congratulated by Dorothy Olding, the American agent, as to, we sort of did a bit of digging and...
Yes, it's one of those things that you go, what could he be congratulated for?
Yes.
And we had a few little looks. I thought possibly knighthood or possibly the publication of Nimrod and its remains. And then
68 is the year he was knighted.
Yes, yeah. And 66 is Nimrod when we checked after.
Yes,
that's his book, by the way, that he spent many years working on and was published in a lovely lavish edition, and he really slaved over.
Yeah, and there were quite a few references to that in papers that we saw today. So Max replied to Dorothy, "It is so kind of you to have written to send your congratulations on this occasion, and we do very much appreciate your generous good wishes. Agatha and I will never forget the many kindnesses you showed us during our visit to New York, and to you will always remain plain Max and Agatha," i.e. you don't need to refer to them as
that's
Lady
so
Mallowan,
sweet,
isn't it? Yeah, and I think that's a theme actually that really shone through. Was we spoke before about Harold's sad passing in 1959 and Dorothy Olding taking the reins fully afterwards, and I think one thing that came across looking at this correspondence was just what a good relationship they had with Dorothy Olding.
Yeah.
To the point where she sends a telegram on every birthday, it seems, to Agatha, which is really sweet. And then finally in 1968, so that is the year that By the Pricking of My Thumbs is published.
By the Pricking of My Thumbs sees Tommy and Tuppence return to investigate a mystery at a nursing home from 1968.
One of the things that was really interesting, so I'd never heard before, I'd either not heard before or forgotten that story for a long time was called The House by the Canal, The House on the Canal. And funnily enough, there is a letter from Edmund Cork at Hughes Massey, Christie's longtime British agent, who says, "I'm not sure whether she is right in changing the title to By the Pricking of My Thumbs, but she seems to feel quite strongly about it, which is final for us." So it's nice to hear they obviously very much respect her say at this point. I mean, I do think By the Pricking of My Thumbs is a much superior title.
Yeah, I do too, yes.
And very classic Christie with the Shakespeare allusion.
Yeah.
But enclosed to this letter, excitingly, there were quite a few line edits for By the Pricking of My Thumbs, weren't there? And just two leaped out to me. I shan't go through them all because a lot of them are, typos and little changes. One was the specifying that the canal should be a disused canal. Christie inserted the word disused a couple of instances there. And I think that's interesting because it does make sense that there is a feeling that the house is past its best and off the beaten track.
Yes, definitely that. That I think if you had people going past going, hello, having waving on their lovely sort of trip, I think you would find that a bit difficult to marry up with the atmosphere.
Exactly, of the rest of the book, absolutely. And also, it being this site of this horrific image of what's behind the fireplace and all the rest of it doesn't quite work. So that's a good edit, but an interesting one. And a hilarious edit, I thought. So there's a passage that talks in detail about the kind of history of that house. And Christie actually inserted at a later date a reference to the addition of bathrooms, which we've talked about a few times.
An obsession.
It's something she's really bothered by, isn't it?
Yes.
Because...
Well, in her own life, back at Greenway, during the war, when it was being used by the US Navy, they added all of those extra bathrooms and they wouldn't take them away. But really, it's just the fact that this in itself, bathrooms just pop up all the time, including in her autobiography. She talks about it all the time.
Yeah. But also it's like, at this point, that was 25 years ago, and she's still sort of irked by it.
But maybe she was irked before that. Maybe that just brought it to the surface.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, maybe it's always been
true.
a thing.
But this is one of the reasons why this archival stuff is so interesting, because you get an insight into the mind, sort of indirectly through inferences and all sorts. But yeah, finally, one last thing in 1968 was just something that caught my eye. There's a letter from the Saturday Evening Post in New York who had rejected the offer to serialise By the Pricking of My Thumbs. And I disagree with, but found quite amusing, their verdict on the story, which is not for us, I'm afraid. The plot is certainly ingenious, but all the people are so bloody decrepit.
And that's only that's much lighter than some of the rejections Passenger to Frankfurt gets, but we might save that for another project.
Quite, yes, yeah. So what did you find in 1969?
So in 1969, there were some editions for Halloween Party.
Yes.
So I thought this was just a nice little bit. And again, I think this might be an extra bit, but just seeing it sort of put in amongst business papers, it's really stood out to me that at the end of chapter 26, so towards the end of the story, there are additional few lines that Christie asked to be inserted. Conversation between Miranda and Poirot, where it starts with, "It was not a dramatic denunciation. Her voice was quiet, with something in it like wonder, but it carried conviction. You did not tell anyone. Why not? I thought it might have been a sacrifice. Who told you that? Michael told me. I didn't quite understand. He said sacrifices were necessary." "And you loved Michael?" asked Poirot gently. "Oh yes," said Miranda. "I loved him very much." So I think, firstly, that's a nice bit of characterisation, especially for Poirot, really. But also, it sort of explains things a bit more. That actually you'd be like, well, why would she go along with this? Because she loved him.
Well, and therefore makes you more sympathetic to Miranda, I think. Which is putting more of the blame on Michael, really. Which, like you say, it clarifies it a bit.
Yeah. And there was another thing in 1969 that I noticed, it's just a little thing, but really sums up the sort of constant battles that they were having, as in Christie's agents, about people wanting as much as they could out of Agatha Christie. And she'd written this article, which we spoke about before, for the Sunday Times magazine, called Poison at the Priory, which was an article not written by her, but was about the Charles Bravo murder case from the 19th century. I'm not going to explain that again now, but Google it if you want to. It's really interesting. And she'd written this letter, Agatha Christie had written this letter where she had said, oh, this is what I think might have happened. And it turns out that that whole article, including the letter, was reprinted in Cosmopolitan in the US. One of the most frequent publishers of Agatha Christie stories in this era, by the way, but without permission. And so actually Christie had only given specific permission, which was that it was not to be published as an article, it had to be published as a letter, and that it was for the Sunday Times, it was for the particular editor, I think. So she got £80 out of that. It's quite a lot of money, really, for in 1969.
Probably was then, yeah.
So yeah, good on them for not just letting that pass by. But I thought that was quite interesting, that even a little bit of, a letter would be enough to have Cosmopolitan pick it up and publish it.
Agatha's words.
It's Agatha's words.
They're very, very valuable.
Yeah.
And then in 1970, you looked at that folder as well.
Yes, I did, and it was quite fun in 1970 that there was something that had some similarity to what you were saying about By the Pricking of My Thumbs, because there was a rejection letter from Redbook, which was a magazine that was one that had published Agatha Christie several times over the years, all the way back to Why Didn't They Ask Evans in 1933, and they published Third Girl in a single volume, a condensed volume in one of their issues in 1967. And they rejected a couple of stories that had been sent to them, Magnolia Blossom and Next to a Dog, which are very old and not really mysteries of Agatha Christie's. So they're decades old at this point. But there's various reasons for this, because there were new collections coming out and there were a few things about copyright and they really wanted them to be published fairly quickly. But this was turned down, both of them were turned down, because they do seem awfully dated now, and to publish them as bits of Christie literary history doesn't seem to suit our mod image somehow, which I loved. So Redbook was going, hey, look, we're swinging. And
mod is such contemporary slang, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We've come up against that a few times.
Yeah, and Magnolia Blossom and Next to a Dog really aren't swinging. They're both, I mean, sentimental's a little bit unfair, but they are not hard-edged. They're not Third Girl, they're not Endless Nights, they are very much of a different era. And
like you say, that was a theme through quite a lot of the stuff that we looked at, was this idea that as they're kind of dredging the archives to go, okay, what else can we find of Christie's to bring to the fore, or serialise or repackage or repurpose or whatever, they were coming up against people saying that this stuff's dated. But interestingly, they weren't saying that of her new novels. They weren't saying, no one was saying that Passenger to Frankfurt felt dated for all its faults.
No, not at all.
And that you said, actually, when we were sat in there in the archive, that proves our thesis that Christie moved with the times, because we nowadays maybe don't see a big delineation between something Christie wrote early and something Christie wrote late, because they're all very much packaged the same. But to a contemporary reader, there's a world of difference between Passenger to Frankfurt and, for example, Next to a Dog.
Absolutely, and this was a big reason why there were so few short story collections in the UK in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s compared to America, and they got short story collections sort of before us, because actually Collins felt that they weren't as strong as what she was writing in the 50s and 60s, and that actually she would perhaps dilute her reputation a bit by bringing these old stories out and putting them in public view like that. So it's interesting that that's quite the opposite of now, as popular perception now is, 20s, 30s as Agatha's peak.
Yeah, that's true.
And just another quick thing was, there's a very sweet letter from Phelps Platt, who's a high up at Dodd Mead, so the American publisher of Agatha Christie, to say that Mrs. Platt and I spent a very pleasant weekend with Agatha and Max Mallowan at their place in Devon a few weeks ago. Agatha was in excellent spirits and health, better than I have seen her in some years. Aww. So that's really lovely, isn't it? And also says how excited she is about her upcoming 80th birthday, and that Passenger to Frankfurt is to be published for it. So that's all lovely. That lovely optimism. This isn't somebody going, and they're forcing me to write another book. Yes. She's in good health, and she's really looking forward to this book coming out.
Yeah, that was really nice to see. And actually, as a side point, we noted that there was the implication from a few different papers that there was I mean, it feels like time was never in great supply, shall we say, in terms of building up to getting something on the shelves for this Christie for Christmas tradition. But certainly when it came to Passenger to Frankfurt, it did seem like there was a particular crush to get it all ready, and they had that deadline of wanting to get it out as close to her 80th birthday as possible, because they were billing it as her 80th, but for her 80th birthday. And I did sort of turn to you and say, you know, I wonder if this is one of the reasons why people have this. Would we have a much different perspective on Passengers Frankfurt if it had a slightly more rigorous edit, as maybe something like Halloween Party the year before had?
Yeah.
And maybe there just wasn't time in terms of the practicalities. I think it's important we remember those practicalities. You know, publishing at the end of the day, we both know, is, you know, a working system with many, many factors, and sometimes ideals and realities don't always kind of marry up. So, yeah, it's just something to remember. I looked at 1972, and speaking of Passenger to Frankfurt, so this is a couple of years after it was first published, and I just appreciated that in 72 there was a US paperback of The Golden Ball and Other Stories, and quoting now, Agatha says there are a number of points, as into this publication, to which she objects. For instance, it says that this collection of old stories, and this is the quote, "it's better than Passenger to Frankfurt."
See, there really are two ways to read that, aren't there? Because if you'd loved, like, if you said something is better than Roger Ackroyd, that is a huge, big compliment, right?
Yes.
But if you say it's better than Passenger to Frankfurt, there's a bit of a, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. Either way, it's not the way to sell a book.
No.
By doing down another of her books, which presumably they'd be interested in the onward selling of as well. But yes, as a long-time Frankfologist, I found that particularly amusing. And then sticking to the Passenger to Frankfurt theme, I looked at the 1973 folder also, and this was something you were already aware of.
Yes, it's been on my long list of things to check, and on our train journey back I finally got around to doing it.
So this is a letter from Collins in the UK, Elizabeth M. Walter at Collins. When the Fontana edition of Passengers to Frankfurt came out, a member of the Courtauld family objected to what he felt was an unfavourable use of the name, his surname, since he claims that they are the only family of that name, and that even though the reference is in no way specific, it casts a slur on them. So William spoke to Lady Malouin, and we have managed to reassure Mr. Courtauld, so that all is well and no further trouble need be expected from this quarter. It seems that Collins agreed to change.
Yes, they did.
The name.
Yes, they did. Yes.
And I think, reading between the lines of this piece of correspondence, it's them reminding the US to follow through with that change.
Yes, which they often did. Yes.
Paperback reprint.
Yes. So it was Courtauld, and then it got changed to Courtfold then.
Courtfold.
Yes.
That famous name.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Not that I know any Courtaulds, but I guess that's his point.
Well, quite,
yes.
Quite. And you should know, whether you know any or not, that they're an upstanding people. Mark.
Absolutely, because the context is Charleston, Conway and Courtfold, who apparently were fully trusted but crooked as sin. So you can imagine that being told that, yes, while people might trust you, you're crooked as sin, perhaps isn't the impression you want everyone to get.
Yes, maybe I see now why he wanted that change. And then in the 1975 folder,
Agatha Christie writes to Dorothy Olding and mentions how she had fond memories of coming to the US 9 years earlier. So that's quite a long time, isn't it, to still be thinking about a trip that she obviously so enjoyed.
Yeah.
And obviously towards the end of Agatha Christie's life now. I also noticed that there was a theme. We noticed a lot in 1976, and maybe it's because it's just after Agatha Christie dies in January that year, that there's a real theme of protecting the Agatha Christie name really, really quickly, and especially from unauthorised publications, which are not necessarily like, illegal publications, but books about Agatha Christie that aren't licensed, which you're allowed to do, but that sometimes we're stepping over the mark of what fair use of things like quotations and stuff are. And there's a mention of Matthew finding a book when he goes to Washington, isn't there, of the mysterious world of Agatha Christie, which he didn't seem to be very happy with. And actually, Rosalind writes a little list of ones that she's found out about, and they're very conscious of saying, look, we know there's an autobiography that's going to come soon, and also we just want to protect what is being said about Agatha Christie in this immediate aftermath of obviously her passing.
Yeah, we did observe that it seems like after the Ramsey book, Agatha Christie, Mistress of Mystery, that we've talked about in the podcast before, which we specifically called out as one of the first, if not the first time that her writing had been written about in that way.
I think so, yeah, absolutely.
But it seemed, looking at these folders today, it struck me that not kind of consciously, but very much opened the floodgates actually for a lot of this kind of writing that seemed to crop up quite a lot in these files, as you say.
People trying to do biographies and analyses and all sorts of things.
Maybe because it was apparent in the time that we're looking at that she was coming towards the end of her career, or indeed at the end of her career, as we're now talking about 1976. I'd like to observe actually that it felt, we almost went through the folders chronologically, and although there was not a huge amount in them from Agatha herself, because obviously a lot of it is the American agent's correspondence. I don't know, it kind of hit me when she passed, when we hit that point chronologically, because it is such a seismic moment, and you forget, I think, when we talk about her work all the time, as we've done on this project and in various other things, you can lose sight of the real person sometimes, and it was really nice actually to feel like we had another type of look at her today, another type of glimpse of her through all this correspondence.
It's now 10:21. Please stand clear of closing train doors, track 20. You do have to all aboard track 20.
So, had a great time at the Schubert Archive yesterday.
Didn't we just? At the beautiful Schubert Archive.
Isn't it?
Yes, it's in the penthouse of a theatre.
On Broadway?
On Broadway, yes, just off Broadway. And I was so excited when I got the email to say, oh, this is, just confirming arrangements to say, and we're going to take you up to the penthouse in a hand-operated lift.
Oh, yes.
And I was like, oh, my God, surely it's not going to be one of those really exciting cage lifts. And it was.
Yeah,
yes.
It was.
And we were very clearly and closely reassured that it's checked regularly and that it's definitely very safe.
And not just the lift, so many properly period detail. They still have chairs that Schubert owned and furniture, beautiful desks.
And that amazing hatch, which you can open up and you can see straight onto the stage. So that when there's a performance going on, you can see what's going on.
He wanted to be able to check in on the production.
Which is so cool. I love that.
With a perfect view, set stage from above. Unfortunately, we didn't find anything of interest to our swinging project.
No,
although
but
that doesn't mean that
plenty for me. Yes. There's a lot of other stuff that I know I'm going to use for my other project. So
top secret.
That's secret, sort of. But I'm really excited to talk about it
because it's a great slice of history in terms of Broadway, which and Agatha is no stranger to Broadway, but not in the 60s. None of the plays that she wrote in the 60s kind of made it. We had hoped maybe we'd see, in a dream world, we'd see a letter that was explaining why they've decided to turn down the Rats or something. But alas. But we did see, I think my favourite thing that I saw was about in the war when they were putting on Towards Zero, and they had to apply for extra shoe rations for the costume.
God.
It's those kind of, like you said, little bits of colour, little sort of period details that you just wouldn't. Only that kind of archive research throws up. And now we're at the train station.
Yes, which you may have guessed.
Ready to head off to the next part of our American adventure, which is Washington DC.
Yeah, very exciting. Got lots to look at there, and I know that we're going to enjoy some of that setting up for a talk we're doing later this year as well. Because,
true. Yes.
Some of this stuff we're looking at in DC, we're going to use for our talkie talk at the International Agatha Christie Festival, which.
Tickets are still available.
As at time recording, tickets are still available. So we're very excited about that. So hope to see some of you there.
Yeah, definitely. And tune in next week for part 2, Washington DC.
Yes.
Yeah.
So please do get in touch with us.
Do, most importantly, if you haven't already, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help us out. We rely on word of mouth to reach fellow Christie fans, so please do.
Yeah. You can find us on Instagram at Christie_time. Our blue sky is christietime.bsky.social. You can also email us at christietimepod, that's prod for productions, @gmail.com. Our website's christietime.com, which has got lots of information about lots of our sources, but also upcoming events you can find there. You can find Gray on his website at grayrobertbrown.wixsite.com/grayrobertbrown. And I'm on Instagram at Dr. Mark Aldridge, blue sky at markaldridge.info, which is also my website. And of course, my book, Agatha Christie's Marple, which I've mentioned once or twice, is available now, as is Poirot and Agatha Christie on screen, I should say. Bye-bye. Keep swinging.
Keep swinging. Thanks for listening, my big apples. The Swinging Christies is a Christie Time project by Dr. Mark Aldridge and Gray Robert Brown. This episode was recorded between the 18th and the 22nd of May 2025. Our artwork was designed by Bartlett Studio, and our music is by Dargolan.
Anybody on train number 43? 43? 43?
Hello and welcome to The Swinging Christies, the podcast about Agatha Christie in the swinging 60s. I'm Mark Aldridge. I'm an Agatha Christie historian and writer, and author of Agatha Christie's Marple, Expert on Wickedness, which, I don't know if you saw, Great, won the HRF Keating Award last
Did
night.
it?
It actually
Stop
won.
it.
Yeah, it did.
No way.
Yeah, it
Oh,
did.
congrats.
Thank you. First time I've ever won an award for anything.
No way.
Yeah, well, as an adult. I've probably got like a spelling award or something at school. I've got a maths award at school, but that is a little while ago.
Well, I'll consider my congratulations 90% for the Maths Award and 10% for the HRF Keating. Is it up for something else, isn't it, as well?
It was up for an Agatha, but didn't win it.
When was that?
About 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
Keating.
Poirot got nominated for just about everything. It didn't win anything. And
Well, that's really good then.
Agatha didn't get nominated for the Edgar, but did get nominated for the Agatha and for this. All of my Agatha Christie books have been nominated for HRF Keating Award, and this is the only one that's won it.
Oh.
So even Agatha Christie on Screen got a nomination for it.
Oh, that's really good. That's a really nice trajectory.
Yeah.